The 6 dangerous people Carl Jung says you must avoid. Have you ever felt the silent weight of someone near you? That presence that doesn't shout but steals your air, leaves your heart trapped in a dark room where light can't find its way. It's an invisible weight, a silence that wounds without words, a shadow that walks beside you, slow and constant, in no hurry, just consuming. You know this tiredness. You feel this fatigue that cannot be explained, as if your energy were a river being drained without return. Perhaps for a long time you have carried this silent guilt of not understanding what is happening within this weight, not knowing why your chest insists on tightening when certain people approach. This pain is not your weak. No, it is human nature speaking through the body, a silent cry that says something is not right here. Sometimes what hurts us is in those we cross paths, people who carry internal storms and who unintentionally drag us into their turmoil. Carl Jung, with his profound wisdom, warns us about 6 types of people who can be true traps for the soul, not because they wish ill, but because they reflect their own abysses, and by getting closer, they drag others into them. It is a delicate journey, a journey where recognizing these figures is not about accusing, but about protecting. It's like understanding that certain beasts in the forest are invisible, but the sound of your heart warns you when they approach. Noticing this is not a sign of weakness, but of care for your own soul. Jung does not offer labels to condemn, but maps to navigate the emotional territory with more awareness. When we allow ourselves to see these shadows, we begin to understand that our response is the only field where we have mastery. Epictetus whispered that it is not events that disturb us, but our opinion about them. Thus, recognizing what or who drains our strength is the first step to planting our feet on solid ground, even if that ground is rough, stony, but true. You may not choose who crosses your life, but you can choose how to allow these presences to inhabit your inner space. And this choice, although difficult, is the most profound gesture of self-love there is. Silence often is the invisible shield that protects what is left of us, the fortress against storms that do not belong to us. Imagine your heart as an old door marked by time that does not open for everyone, not out of pride, but to preserve what is sacred. Not all absence is abandoned. Sometimes it is just space for you to grow in quiet, without noises that confuse the mind and soul. So this path begins now with the simple act of looking inward and realizing who are these 6 people that Carl Jung pointed out, who carry with them a danger that goes beyond the physical. A danger that resides in their projected shadows, which can leave deep, invisible, but real mark. To recognize is an act of courage. To follow this path is an act of care. And, as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, difficulty shows us what we are. The cold wind that blows through a restless mind can also be the breath that reminds us of our silent strength. The mountain that stands before us is not an obstacle, but the place where we plant our feet to continue. This is the invitation to look at these people with the eyes of the soul, not to condemn, but to protect, to know when it is time to walk away, to be silent, to breathe, because in the end, the biggest battle, preserve one's own, even when the world around it seems to be made storm. The manipulator is like a calm river that hides dangerous whirlpool beneath its surface. At first glance, he seems like a friend, someone who understands and supports, but we soon realize that every gesture, every word, is carefully calculated to pull us down, to where oxygen is scarce and the heart tight. Being near him is feeling that your steps are not your own. They dance to a music we don't hear, an invisible melody that dictates our movements and decides what we can or cannot feel. This person has a silent ability to distort reality, to turn the truth into something malleable, as fragile as glass that shatters lightest touch. It is a dangerous dance between affection and control, where love becomes a prison without bars and freedom a forgotten dream. In the presence of the manipulator, our mind becomes a battlefield where doubts and insecurities spread like fire, slowly burning what is left of our self-confidence. Manipulation does not reveal itself in shouts or obvious confrontation. It manifests in subtle gestures, a look that weighs, a question that is a trap, a silence that speaks louder than words. The feeling is of walking in a dark forest where every shadow seems like an imminent danger, and the body, even when exhausted, remains alert, trapped in a silent vigil. And it is precisely this invisible wear and tear that makes it so difficult to realize how much we have been ensnare. When we let ourselves be ensnared, it is as if we are leaves in the wind carried without control away from solid ground. Jung warns us that these people can be dangerous because they steal our contact with our own essence, making us doubt our feeling, our perception. It is a type of silent violence, a slow erosion that corrodes the soul without a sound. In the midst of this confusion, the inner voice falls silent. The heart that once beat strong, full of hope, now hesitates. Doubt. The freedom to be who we are seems like a forbidden luxury. But it is precisely in this silent, in this invisible prison, that the greatest battle lies, the struggle to rediscover one's own truth. Seneca reminds us that true freedom lies in self-mastery, because even when the manipulator tries to bend our thoughts and feeling, what is outside of our control can never control what lives within. It is there, in the deep silence of the heart, that the most solid resistance is found, an invisible fortress, made not of walls, but of presence and consciousness. This struggle is silent but necessary, and even if it seems impossible, the simple act of recognizing the invisible thread that binds us is already a step towards reclaiming our own power. Because the river, however turbulent it may be, can always find its way back to the sea, where vastness embraces and peace does not depend on the current. Feeling this prison without bars is not weakness. It is an invitation to dive into one's own essence, to listen to the truths that the body whispers when the mind is too tired to think. It is an invitation to rediscover oneself, one step at a time, even if it seems too slow. The manipulator is a shadow that can become light, as long as we can choose not to walk in the dark anymore. It is a challenge to learn that sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go of the hands that are trying to hold our chest. Because true freedom is born in the firm ground of self-care, not in the invisible chains of others' control. The envious person carries a weight that is not their own, a shadow that silently consumes the brightness of others, as if light were a rare coin that can only exist for a few. Being near him is feeling the air become dense, as if a cold fog were covering the heart, preventing it from beating freely. It is a presence that looks not at who you are, but at what you have. And in this narrow view, value is measured in possessions, achievements, and smiles that the other cannot yet show off. This person lives in a constant internal disharmony, where the joy of others becomes an open wound and comparison, a sword that cuts deep. Envy is not just a feeling, but an invisible prison that traps the one who feels it in a cycle of suffering. Because deep down, nothing extinguishes the hunger that only grows, the hunger to be seen, to be recognized, to be enough. But in trying to extinguish the light of others, he ends up diving even deeper into his own dark. The envious person's gaze weighs like a loaded cloud that never unloads, a storm that threatens to flood the fertile ground where hope could grow. What seems like anger is, in reality, a silent lament, a scream that gets lost in the subtext of everyday life. The body tense, the breath becomes short, and the soul, suffocated, seeks a relief that never comes. In living with this shadow, the feeling is that your own light is slowly fading, like a candle fighting against the wind. You find yourself looking inward, trying to understand why the other person's presence corrodes your peace, why the joy of others turns into a thorn in your chest. And this doubt hurts more than any open confrontation, because it is self-doubt that corrodes the most. Marcus Aurelius taught that envy is a poison that only reaches the one who drinks. It is a wound that no one can heal except the one who refuses to carry the weight of comparison. It is the trap of a mind that forgets to look inward to its own virtue and seeks in others what it lacks to feel whole. This paradox is cruel. The more he tries to diminish the brightness of others, the more he darkens his own soul. Envy is a prison without bars, where the prisoner forgets that the key is in his own hand. The one who lives in this cycle runs the risk of getting lost, of becoming a stranger to himself, a ghost who watches life pass by, always from the outside. But there is a sad beauty in this struggle, the recognition that the envious person's pain is, in reality, the echo of a profound loneliness. It is the emptiness that cannot be filled by external achievement, because it resides in a place that only silence can touch. It is there, in the quietness of the heart, that healing begins, not to extinguish envy, but to transform it into a lesson about the limit of desire. Envy, then, reveals itself as a fire that burns from within, but which can also light the way to freedom if we learn to look at it without fear. Because only in the light of consciousness can we see that the brightness of others does not diminish our own, and that true abundance is born from the acceptance of who we are at the exact moment we are. Thus, the envious person, even being a difficult presence, is also a mirror, an invitation for us to ground ourselves in the clarity of our own essence and learn that peace does not depend on what is outside, but on what we can cultivate within. Because in the end, the field where serenity blossoms is always the ground where we plant our own truth. The continuous critic is a presence that echoes within us like a cutting wind that does not stop, that gives no truth. His words are not just spoken. They are invisible blades stick into the delicate fabric of our self-esteem, leaving wounds that we cannot always see, but that hurt in silence. Being before him is feeling that every gesture, every thought will be examined, judged, and almost always found to be insufficient, imperfect, unworthy of love or acceptance. It's like walking in a landscape where the sky is always overcast and the sunlight rarely breaks through the thick clouds of judgment. The body stiffens, the chest tight, and the mind gets lost in a labyrinth of doubt, where the inner voice that should comfort falls silent, replaced by a cold and relentless whisper that repeats, "You are not enough." This phrase, spoken so many times, becomes a mantra that corrodes silence and inner peace. The critic does not pause. He is present in the smallest detail, in the way we hold a cup, in the tone of voice we use, in the way we breathe. Everything is a reason to point out flaw, to cast shadow over what could be a simple act of existing, and this constant pressure transforms what was once freedom into a gilded cage, where the weight of approval is an impossible burden to carry. This continuous judgment is, paradoxically, a mask for the critic's own insecurity. He projects his own wounds onto us, his own inability to accept human imperfection, an internal battle fought with the armor of excessive rigor. It is a silent war where no one emerges victorious, only a survivor. Epictetus reminded us that we should not let ourselves be disturbed by what is not in our power. However, when the critic lives nearby, it seems that everything is out of our control, as if our essence were a leaf at the mercy of the merciless wind. But there is a space where this voice can be embraced without it dominating us, where judgment can be seen as a reflection, not as absolute truth. It is in this space between the breath of the wind and the firmness of the root that we find the possibility of reconstruction. To recognize the critic is to give him a name, place, an existence that is not tyrannical, that serves for growth. Because in life, criticism does not have to be a punishment, but an invitation to careful vigilance, to care for one's own path. But be careful not to get lost in this constant echo. Seneca said that anger is a fire. It warms or it burns. A critic can be a fire that warms, helps us improve. But if we let him control us, he will be a fire that burns, destroying what is most precious, our confidence in being human with all our imperfect. Therefore, the continuous critic is not an enemy to be eliminated, but a shadow to be understood, a part of the internal landscape that needs to be viewed with compassion and firmness. The battle is not against him, but for our freedom to exist fully, even in the face of attentive and demanding eye. Thus, the voice that was once a blade can become a lighthouse, a light that guides without wounding, illuminating the way back home to oneself. The chronic victim is a presence shrouded in a fog of complaints and never-ending suffering. She walks through life as if she is carrying an invisible burden, a weight that seems unbearable, but which, paradoxically, she never lets go of. Being near her is feeling a magnetic field of pain, a constant pull into a storm where the entire world is the enemy, except for herself. It is a place where blame is distributed as if it were currency, and the role of savior is always offered without anyone asking for it. This person lives in a cycle where pain is her identity and reason for existing. What could be a call for transformation becomes a trap where suffering is repeated, recited like a prayer that never finds relief. The body tenses up in the face of this weight, the breath becomes short, and the soul seems to be trapped in a cell made of lamentations that echo endless. What hurts is not just the lament itself, but the effect this posture has on those around her. It is like being in a house where the windows are closed and the heavy air accumulates with no way out, suffocating even those who want to help. The victim's silence is laden with unspoken complaints, with a constant expectation that others will take responsibility for her pain, denying the possibility of self-care and freedom. Marcus Aurelius taught that we are not disturbed by what happens, but by the opinion we have about it. However, the chronic victim seems to have imprisoned her heart in a fixed opinion of helplessness, where personal power is always delegated to external forces. This view reduces the capacity for action, transforming suffering into a self-feeding prison, a vicious cycle that drains energy and hope. But behind this armor of suffering, there is a deep wound, cry for help, that does not know any other way to express itself. It is the paradox of someone who calls for help but rejects the power to free themselves. This dynamic creates a painful tension where self-love is lost to conditional love, which depends on others to exist. The path of the chronic victim is the threshold between accepting pain and the search for transformation. It is a delicate territory where self-care can seem like betrayal, and the courage to say enough is seen as abandonment. Still, the most resilient fortress is born from the decision not to define oneself only by suffering, but to allow pain to be just a chapter, not the whole story. Epictetus said that freedom is the only good that cannot be taken away without our consent. And this consent often is given unconsciously in a silent surrender that perpetuates the cycle. Recognizing this act is the first step to reclaiming lost power, to opening the windows of the house where the air can finally circulate. The chronic victim, then, is an invitation for us to learn about the limits of care and the importance of self-love. It is a reminder that true freedom resides in the choice, even if painful, to get up, even when the weight seems unbearable. Because in the end, the greatest transformation happens when we allow ourselves to leave the storm and look at the sky, even if it is gray, and know that there is also hope there. The decision to distance yourself from these 6 people is not an act of selfishness, but a silent journey of self-care that many fear to begin. Accepting that some presences do not serve us, even when they are intertwined with memories and promises, is an exercise in courage that requires more than strength. It requires self-compassion. Breaking these invisible bonds is like releasing the anchors that hold us in turbulent waters, opening up space for our own heart to find its rhythm, its silence. This rupture does not happen abruptly, nor with large, decisive steps. It is more like a slow, hesitant dance, where each step away is accompanied by a memory, a fear, a doubt. The body that was once bound by invisible chains begins to feel the wind, feels the possibility of movement, even if it is shy. And it is in this wind, in the breath that comes from newfound freedom, that the hope of a reunion with oneself resides. The internal battle that is fought in this process is delicate. Often, the fear of being alone is greater than the pain of living with these dangerous presents. The mind creates stories, justifies, recalls good moments, tries to hide the truth that the heart already knows. Not all company is a shelter. This contradiction is the true proof of our humanity, the paradox between wanting to belong and needing to protect oneself. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the soul is colored by the thought. When we decide to change the circle that surrounds us, we begin to paint our soul with new color, lighter, firmer colors that reflect the serenity won through the practice of silence and presence. Because deep down, this decision is not against the other person, but in favor of what makes us take a deep breath, allows us to listen to our own heart and find peace. And this peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to respond and not react, to be an immovable lighthouse in the midst of the storm. It is to recognize that, although we cannot control the people who cross our path, we can choose how to let them in and for how long they stay. This boundary is a sacred act of self-respect, an invisible wall that protects the garden where we cultivate life. The path is long, not always linear. There will be relapses, doubts, pains that seem unbearable, but even the highest mountain is conquered one step at a time, and firmness does not come from the absence of wind, but from the root that deepens in the earth. In this process, every choice for yourself is a silent act of love, which builds, brick by brick, the fortress of the soul. The journey to avoid what is dangerous is not about closing doors, but about building internal bridges that lead us to the encounter with integrity, clarity, and quiet. Because, as Epictetus taught, happiness and freedom begin with the understanding of one simple principle. Some things are within our control and others are not. The wisdom is in learning to live with this, with serenity, planting our feet on the ground, our heart in the truth, and our eyes on the horizon of our own transformation. Silence is one of the most powerful practices when we face people who drain our energy, when other people's voices threaten to overshadow our own truth. It is not empty, nor is it an absent. It is a sacred space where the soul finds rest and clarity, a pause that allows us to listen to what really matters. Sitting in silence, even for brief moments, is taking a step out of the storm. It is creating an internal refuge where the noise of the world cannot reach. Imagine the heart as a deep cave where echoes get lost and sounds get confused. Silence is the guardian of this cave, the shadow that protects what is most fragile and true within us. In this invisible shelter, anger, sadness, and fear can arise without being crushed or denied. They can exist, be recognized, even touched, without needing to dominate our narrative. It is in this space that transformation begins, not as a shout, but as a whisper that becomes firm. Conscious, slow, and deep breathing is the anchor that keeps the body and mind present in this moment of quietness. Inhaling and exhaling with attention is a gesture of care, an invitation to return to the body, to feel life pulsating beyond anger and annoyance. It is a practice that reminds us that we are greater than any fleeting emotion, that within us there is a space of calm that can be accessed at any time. This serenity is not born from the denial of emotion, but from the silent mastery over them. It is an invitation to live with integrity, to feel with depth, to act with awareness, speak with truth. It is to recognize that anger, like fire, can be destructive or transformative. It depends on how we relate to it. By embracing it in silence, we transform the internal storm into a clearing, conflict into a lesson, pain into wisdom. Thus, the final invitation is for you to embrace this silent path, this daily ritual of presence and care. May the silence within you become a sacred space, where anger does not need to scream to be heard, where peace can blossom even in the shadows of annoyance. Because in the end, serenity is not the absence of conflict, but the silent mastery over